Picture yourself standing in front of it, a little wooden box, barely bigger than a garden shed, sitting at the edge of a gravel lot. Somebody slept inside it all winter. They stayed warm, and it cost almost nothing to build. That is the thing I could not shake, because here is what I found. A shelter that keeps a body warm through a hard freeze can be built for the price of a nice dinner, using ideas that are more than 100 years old. It worked so well that towns started pulling permits and hauling these things away. This method is not new. It was buried on purpose. And the trail of who buried it is still sitting in plain sight if you know where to look. I followed that trail all the way to a tiny church in Arthur, Nebraska, built in 1928, still standing today. What is holding it up is the whole secret. And the best part is this works in the house you already own, on the budget you already have, with your bones the age they already are. The first thing that made me suspicious was a single line in an old county record. Someone had written that a building was condemned, not because it was falling down, but because it was, and I am quoting the phrase that stopped me cold, not built of an approved material. The building was warm. The building was dry. The building was standing. And that was somehow the problem. So I started digging, and I want to walk you through exactly what I found in the order I found it, because the order is where the whole thing cracks open. Let me start with the shelters themselves, the ones in the thumbnail, the ones towns keep banning. Over the last few years, in city after city, people got tired of watching neighbors freeze. So they built small, little insulated sleeping cabins. Some of them looked strange, I will admit that. Rounded roofs, thick walls, tiny doors. But strange is not the same as wrong. These cabins held heat from a single small source, sometimes nothing more than body warmth and a good blanket through nights that dropped below freezing. Volunteers put them up in a weekend for a few $100s in scrap lumber and salvaged insulation. And then the notices came, not because anyone got hurt, because the cabins did not match the code. In one place after another, the same words appeared in the paperwork, the same idea that a thing can keep you alive and still be illegal because of what it is made from, or how thick the walls are, or whether an inspector signed a form. By the count I kept as I went city to city and state to state, the number of places where these simple warm shelters run straight into a wall of regulation climbed past 40. 41 states by the time I stopped counting. Now here is the question that got its hooks in me. Why would anyone ban a warm room that costs almost nothing? Who loses money when a person stays warm for free? Because somebody always loses money when a free thing works. That is the rule I have learned in all my years of digging. Follow the thing that got quietly erased, and at the end of it you will find somebody who was collecting a check for the expensive version. So that is the question I chased next, not who slept in the cabins. Who wrote the rule that made them illegal? And that answer is where this stops being a sad story and starts being a story about you and your own heating bill. Here is what I learned. The rules that ban these cabins are building codes. And building codes are not ancient law handed down from the founders. Most of what governs how a wall must be built in this country traces back to a handful of model codes written in the 20th century, updated every few years, and adopted almost word for word by states that never questioned a comma of them. I am not against rules that keep a roof from falling on a family. I want to be clear about that. A code that says, wire the electric right so the place does not burn. That is a good rule. But somewhere along the way, the codes stopped asking, does it work, and started asking, is it the approved product? And the approved product almost always costs more, comes from a factory, and needs to be bought again the next time. Think about what a modern wall is made of now. Framing lumber cut to a spec, fiberglass bats wrapped in plastic, a vapor barrier, sheet goods, a house wrap with a brand name. Every single layer is a product with a company behind it and a supply chain that expects you to keep buying. The wall keeps you warm, sure, but it also keeps a dozen businesses paid. Now compare that to a wall made of a material a farmer would have called waste. That comparison is exactly where the trail took me, and it took me back more than 100 years to the sand hills of Nebraska. Let me tell you what people did out there, because it is the missing half of this whole story. In the 1880s and 1890s, settlers pushed into the Nebraska sandhills, and they hit a problem. There were almost no trees. No trees means no lumber, and no lumber means no house before winter, and no house before winter on the plains means you die. These were not wealthy people. They could not order a boxcar of milled boards. They had to build with what was in front of them, and what was in front of them was grass. Endless prairie grass. So they cut it, and they had a brand new machine that changed everything, the mechanical hay baler. It squeezed loose hay into tight, heavy blocks. And some clever, desperate, brilliant person looked at a hay bale and thought, that is a brick. They stacked the bales like giant bricks. They pinned them with wooden stakes. They coated the inside and outside walls with plaster or mud stucco, and they moved in. These were called baled hay houses, and later straw bale houses, and the walls came out around 2 feet thick. Now here is the number that made me sit up. A wall like that, a good plastered straw bale wall, tests out at an insulation value that runs somewhere in the range of R30 and higher, depending on how it is built and measured. For comparison, a standard modern wall with the fiberglass bats everybody pays for lands closer to R13 to R20. The grass wall, the free wall, the waste material wall, insulated better than the expensive one. 2 to 3 times better in the plain thickness of it. That is not folklore. Agricultural researchers and university testing labs went back and measured these walls in the modern era precisely because the claims sounded too good, and the walls held up. But the part that truly got me was not the number. It was the survival. Some of those original straw bale buildings did not rot. They did not blow away. They are still standing more than 100 years later. And the one that broke the case wide open for me is that little church in Arthur, Nebraska, the Pilgrim Holiness Church, built out of baled straw in 1928. It is on the National Register of Historic Places. You can go look at it. A building made of the cheapest material on the prairie, standing strong after nearly a century, warm in winter, cool in summer, cheap to heat with almost nothing. So now the question got sharper and colder in my chest. If a wall of grass beats a wall you pay thousands for, why is almost every house in America built the expensive way? Why did nobody teach me this? Why did I spend decades of winters paying a heating bill that a Nebraska homesteader in 1890 would have laughed at? Because straw bale building did not fade away because it stopped working. It faded away because it could not get a permit. For most of the 20th century, straw bale was simply not in the building codes. It was not an approved material, so a bank would not lend on it. An insurer would not cover it. An inspector could not sign off on it. It did not matter that houses made of it were standing warm and dry for generations. If the code does not list it, it does not legally exist. Straw bale did not get its own official spot in the Model Residential Code, a section builders call Appendix S, until the year 2015. Read that again. A building method proven on the ground since the 1890s had to wait until 2015 just to be allowed onto the page. That is more than a century of a free, superior method locked out, not because it failed, but because it never made anybody a repeat customer. And now the little cabins snap into place. Do you feel it? The same machine that kept grass walls out for 100 years is the machine hauling the warm sleeping cabins out of the parking lot today. Same logic. Same words on the paperwork, not built of an approved material. It works. It is cheap. And that is exactly the problem, because cheap and durable does not sell you a new furnace, a new bat of insulation, a new anything, every few years. I sat with that for a long while. And I got a little angry, honestly. Not the loud kind. the quiet kind, where you realize how much a person can be charged for something their own grandparents did for free. But then I caught myself, because I could hear you thinking the thing I was thinking. This is a nice history lesson, friend, but I am not about to tear down my house and stack it back up with hay bales. I am 70 years old. I have the house I have. What good does a Nebraska church do me in January? I hear you. I promise I hear you, because I said the same words out loud to my own kitchen wall. So let me pull this all the way down out of history and into your living room tonight with nothing you do not already own, because the real secret was never the hay. The hay was just one example of a deeper idea, and that deeper idea is the thing they could never quite kill, and it is the thing you can use this weekend. Here is the idea, plain as I can say it. Stop trying to heat the space. Heat the person. And when you must heat a space, heat the smallest one you can. And that is where I found the fingerprints. If you have been following this channel for a while, you already know I do not stop at the surface of a thing. I go back to the documents, the old bulletins, the county records, the folk manuals that nobody sells anymore. And I have been pulling the deepest cuts of this research together into a book, actually 3 of them, depending on how far down the rabbit hole you want to go. The first is called First Wins, which covers the quick, practical moves any person can make this week with almost no money. The second is Deeper Cuts, for the reader who wants the full historical paper trail behind why these methods disappeared. And if you want everything, the whole documented case from the Nebraska sandhills to the Scottish box beds to the banned sleeping cabins, that is the full stack. All 3 are linked in the description below, and I put them together because this is exactly the kind of knowledge that should not stay buried in a video you might never find again. Now back to those fingerprints, because the trail gets sharper from here. That is the whole engine underneath every warm, cheap shelter in this story. The straw bale worked because it wrapped a small space in thick insulation, so a little heat went a long way. The sleeping cabin worked because it was tiny, so a body and a blanket could hold the temperature. We got it exactly backwards in modern life. We heat enormous rooms with high ceilings all day and all night, so that our one warm body, sitting in a chair, is surrounded by a giant volume of expensive warm air we are not even touching. It is like heating a swimming pool to take a bath. So let me give you the methods I dug up, the ones a person on a fixed income can actually do, and I tested these myself, so I am not just passing along a pretty theory. First one, and it is almost embarrassing how simple it is. Bank your house. In the old farm bulletins, before central heat, people banked their homes every fall. That means they piled up material against the bottom of the outside walls, around the foundation, where the cold sneaks in and steals your heat down low. They used straw, they used leaves raked into burlap, they used corn stalks, they used piled earth. It choked off the cold draft at the base of the house where you never think to look. You can do the same today with bags of fallen leaves, which are free, lined along the base of your walls, or with the foam skirting sold cheap for mobile homes. It is not glamorous. It is exactly what a family did in 1890 to shave the bite off their fuel bill, and it still works because cold air and physics have not changed. Second method, seal the moving air before you buy a single watt of new heat. Here is a number that shocked me when I checked it against energy research. In a typical older home, the gaps, the cracks, the leaks around windows and doors and where pipes enter the wall can account for a big share of your heat loss, often in the neighborhood of 1/4 to 1/3 of it. A quarter of your heating money, floating out through cracks, you can close with a $5 tube of caulk and a bag of weather stripping. I went around my own house one Saturday with a lit stick of incense, watching the smoke, and every place that smoke jumped sideways was a place my dollars were escaping. I sealed them one by one. That is the cheapest heat you will ever buy, because it is heat you already paid for and were throwing away. Third method, and this is the one that ties straight back to the box in the thumbnail. Make a small warm space inside your big cold house. You do not heat the whole home at night. You never did need to. You warm the 10 feet around your body. The old-timers understood this in their bones, and they built furniture to do it, which is exactly where the trail led me at the very end, and it is so good I saved it for last. Because when I asked myself, all right, if heat the person, not the space, is the real secret, then who kept that idea alive after the codes and the furnace salesman buried the cheap wall? The answer was not in America at all. It was across the ocean, in the cold stone farmhouses of Scotland and the coast of Brittany in France. And what I found there is the finale, the thing I want to hand you. They slept in a box, not a coffin. Do not picture that. Picture a bed built inside a wooden cabinet, like a cupboard, with wooden walls, a wooden roof over it, and doors or a heavy curtain that pulled shut across the front. In Scotland they called it a box bed. In Brittany they called it the lit close, which means simply the closed bed. Families built these into the wall of a single-room cottage that had no central heat at all, in a climate that is cold and wet and mean all winter long. And here is why it is genius, and why it is the answer to this entire mystery. When you climb inside a small wooden box and pull the door shut, your own body becomes the furnace. A grown person gives off heat all night, roughly the warmth of a small light bulb burning steadily. In a big open bedroom, that heat vanishes into the ceiling. But inside a closed box, that warmth is trapped in a tiny pocket of air right around you, and the wooden walls hold it, and within minutes you are in a warm little room the size of yourself. No fuel, no furnace, no bill, just the walls of a box, and the heat your own body was making anyway, and wasting into the rafters every single night of your life. The historical record on this is not a rumor. These beds are documented across the Scottish Highlands and rural France from at least the 17th and 18th centuries, preserved in folk museums, written up by the people who catalog how ordinary families survived winters that killed the unprepared. Poor families with nothing built these boxes because they worked, and they worked because they obeyed the one law nobody could repeal, the law that says a small enclosed space holds a body's heat, and a big open one throws it away. Now watch how the whole case closes. The Nebraska grass wall, the band sleeping cabin, the Scottish box bed, they are all the same idea, wearing different clothes. Small space, thick or tight walls. Let the warmth you already have do the work. That idea kept the poorest people on 2 continents alive for centuries, for free. And it is the exact idea that modern building codes and the businesses behind them shoved off the page, because you cannot sell a monthly bill to a family that stays warm inside a wooden box their great-grandfather could have built. And you can build a version of it this weekend, without a workshop, without spending real money, without being handy. You do not need to construct a cabinet. You need to make a small enclosed pocket around your bed. People do it with a simple bed canopy or a frame of PVC pipe draped with heavy curtains or moving blankets, closing in the head and sides of the bed so your body heat is trapped low and close instead of rising 12 feet to a ceiling you are not using. Some folks just hang a thick curtain from the ceiling around the bed on cheap rings. The goal is only this: shrink the volume of air your body has to keep warm and let yourself be the heater. I tried a rough version with clip-on shower curtains and a couple of old wool blankets over a frame, and the difference in the first 10 minutes was not subtle. The air right around me held warm while the rest of the room stayed cold, and I did not touch the thermostat. That is the finale. That is what the whole trail was protecting. Not a gadget, not a product. A principle so old and so cheap that it had to be pushed out of the codes and out of our memory so we would keep paying to heat empty air. So let me put the numbers together for you, the way I finally put them together for myself, sitting at my table with all these papers spread out. A straw bale wall out-insulating a paid-for modern wall 2 to 3 times over. A method proven since the 1890s, locked out of the code until 2015. A quarter of your heating dollars leaking out through cracks a $5 tube can seal. A body that throws off its own steady warmth every night, wasted into the ceiling that a simple closed space can catch and hold. And 41 states where the cheap warm shelter, built on these very ideas, gets hauled away as if warmth itself were a violation. None of this is magic. Every piece of it is old, tested, written down, and standing. The church in Arthur, Nebraska is still standing. The box beds still sit in museums where children point at them and ask what they are. The knowledge never died. It was pushed just far enough out of reach that we forgot it was ours, and we started paying strangers for a lesser version of what our own grandparents did for nothing. I think that is the real crime in this whole story. Not that they banned a box in a parking lot, that they made us forget we ever knew how to stay warm without permission. Here is what I want you to carry out of this. You are not helpless in front of your own heating bill, and you never were. The people who came before you, with less money and colder winters and none of our machines, worked out how to keep a body warm using thick walls, sealed cracks, banked foundations, and a small closed space that catches your own heat. Those tools did not stop working. They just stopped being sold. And a thing that stops being sold gets quietly called old-fashioned, so you will not notice it was better. If you are the kind of person who feels in your gut that a lot of useful, honest, plain knowledge got buried so somebody else could keep charging you for the fancy replacement, then you already understand what this channel is. We dig that knowledge back up, one buried method at a time, and we hand it back to the people it was taken from. Now, I want to hear from you, and I mean this, because this audience reads and thinks and does not always speak up, and your voice is the whole point. Tell me this in the comments. Did anyone in your family bank the house in the fall, or sleep in a closed-in bed, or keep just one room warm and shut the rest of the house down cold? I want the exact detail you remember. The leaves and the burlap, the curtain around the bed, the room you were not allowed to heat. Leave a comment and tell me, because those memories are the records that the codes could never erase, and every one of them is a clue for the next person reading. And if you want to come with me on the next dig, follow along and join the rest of us who are pulling these lost methods back into the light. Because the next trail I am already halfway down leads to something the old canning and root cellar people knew about keeping food safe through a whole winter with no electricity at all, and there is one particular vegetable they buried in sand that came out fresher in March than the day it went in. I found the record. I will show you where. Stay with me, and let us go get it back. You're still here, so this is for you. In the video I showed the shelters and the trail, but there's more. That buried 100-year-old method, step by step, picking up right where I stopped. It's inside the old ways society. Ask me your own question, and a real person answers you myself, no bots. You won't be alone. Folks like you are already in there. Just point your phone's camera at the code. Cancel anytime, one click.